Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another Are You Afraid of the Dark episode review. This episode comes from Season 6, aka the first season of the revival era of that 90s to early 2000s run. It was written by Mark Perry and directed by Jacques Laberge, and the episode in question is The Tale of the Wisdom Glass. Now, funny enough, I've actually watched this episode quite a few times in recent times, and I've been meaning to put out an episode review of this, and I just never got around to it. So here we are. I rewatched it yet again for this review purpose. And I have to say, every time I watch this episode, my emotions kind of fluctuate. And it just, I guess this is one of those episodes or stories in kids' horror that I found that if you catch me on a bad day, I might not like this as much, but if you catch me on a good day, I might actually like it. So, yeah, this is a very weird episode and weird kids' horror story for me in general. And funny enough, I've said this before and I'll say it again. I think season 6 of Are You Afraid of the Dark is underrated and overhated by the Are You Afraid of the Dark fandom. And I know a lot of you out there watching, if you are fans of Are You Afraid of the Dark, you probably love seasons 1 through 5 and you don't care as much for season 6 and 7. I get that that's the popular sentiment, but to me, I think season 6 and 7 in some regards have some really good standouts in the show that go overlooked because of, I guess, bias, which is unfair. As for this episode, there is a lot of charm within it, and it's kind of on brand with Are You Afraid of the Dark, but it also doesn't feel like the show in some regards, and we'll get into that near the end of the video. But nonetheless, do I recommend that you go watch The Tale of the Wisdom Glass? I think, yeah, I would recommend this. If only for this being a relatively obscure and under talked about episode. I feel like if you go watch this, you might be able to appreciate a lot of technical aspects to it, or maybe the message of the story. But all in all, I think it's entertaining in its own right, especially for this show standards. And I think it's inoffensive enough for most people out there to enjoy. So take that for what you will. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into the plot overview of The Tale of the Wisdom Glass without giving too much away. So the story starts off like every Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, where the Midnight Society, they gather together in the woods where they inhabit nearby, and they collect together, and whoever's turn it is to share a story gathers I think it's this powder. I think it's like powdered milk or something. I forget exactly what it was, but they would throw it onto the fire and it will ignite, and then that kicks off the story. And once the narrator of this story, says their piece and the background and the backdrop to set the mood for the tale, the story kicks on. And it's about this kid named Alan. And Alan, he's played by the actor who starred in the episode from Goosebumps, Don't Go to Sleep. Funny enough, as we'll see in the plot overview, some similarities to that episode. But Alan, he's at this mall of sorts, and he's out shopping at this hobby store or maybe video game store. It looks like it's like a mixture of board games and video games, and it's kind of nerdy. But he's in there, and you can tell that Alan is a bit affluent, or maybe he's rich. He's wearing like a nice jacket. He has some nice clothes, and he's in there to spend some money, particularly his father's money. And while he's in the store, he sees this other kid named Jimmy, and Jimmy's looking at this game, and he's getting kind of profiled by the store owner, who is obviously sucking up to this kid, trying to get his money. And Alan sticks up for Jimmy and kind of befriends him, and they overlook this game, and I think it's called the Wisdom Game, and it's a PC ROM, old school video game from the 90s. It's kind of dated, but still kind of relevant, because I guess people still play PC games, but it's not as popular, I guess, nowadays. Well, anyways, the store owner kind of shoos Jimmy away and then confronts Alan After the store owner called his father to make sure that this purchase that he was planning on making would be okay, he was told that his dad has essentially cut him off and that he needs to get out because he's not a paying customer. And plus, Alan usually acts like a jerk to him whenever he's in his store. So Alan is like, okay, whatever, I'll leave. And he leaves in a kind of a hurry. And he goes outside to his limo driver and he gets in the back seat. But then he realizes that he's accidentally taken the game from the store. And instead of going and doing the right thing and taking it back to the store owner, he decides to keep it. And he notices that Jimmy is nearby, I guess at a bus stop, I guess waiting for a bus to get a ride home. And he screams out to Jimmy to offer him a ride home to his place. And Jimmy gets in the limo and he's like, hey, I see you got the game. You know, I got a PC at my house. Let's go take it there and play it. And then when they get there, Alan kind of reveals to Jimmy that he got this game for him, essentially, and it would be cool if they get to play together. And as they're talking, the kids are kind of bonding, and Alan gets a sense, and he even mentions it to his limo driver, that it looks like the Prince and the Pauper, because where Jimmy lives is the total opposite of where Alan lives. It's implied that Alan probably lives in a nice estate, but Jimmy kind of lives in a bad part of town with like a shanty apartment kind of thing going on. And he sees a hockey stick in Jimmy's room, and so it mentions that he's never been to a hockey game, and Jimmy's like, well, let's make that happen. So the boys are bonding, and they put the game in the computer to boot it up, and almost immediately they're prompted with giving out their actual names for information on the PC, I guess. And after they do that, there's a prompt that says there's a $10,000 prize for a tournament that's happening the very next day. And suddenly the game has a weird glitch and prints out on the printer nearby pretty much directions to this competition. And after that happens, the game like boots down and stops working. And the boys are kind of bummed out that they didn't get to play it, but Jimmy has the bright idea, and he's like, well, let's just go tomorrow. If we win, we can split the money. And because Alan has been cut off by his dad, he also sees the benefit of going to play for this cash. So he agrees with Jimmy, and the next day comes and goes. And they're out in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere, and Alan's limo driver drops him off at this hut with this weird symbol on it. And the kids wander inside. They go down the stairs. They see this long hallway. And then they wander into a room with this really oddball looking people. Like, you got people dressed up in jester costumes. You got what appears to be guards wearing checker patterns on their face paint and on their outfits. There's a woman walking around, or more so floating. And when she looks at you, she has no eyes. And when the kids arrive there, they're like, oh, we must be early. And they're like, who are you? And they're like, well, hey, I think we put our name in the system. And the lady's like, oh, yeah, let me go look. And she goes over to this crystal ball and puts in their names, and it registers a red flag. And then eyes randomly appear on her face, glowing bright red, telling everybody to get the kids after the kids have put on some robes to, I guess, fit in with the crowd. And then they're taken to essentially a court trial because now there's a case made against them, or it was made evident when they acquired the game that they didn't actually buy the game. And now they are sent to the judge, who has this thing called the wisdom glass up on his table. And the wisdom glass pretty much dictates all the moves he's going to do in the trial and for the rest of the episode. And the kids are, like, what do we do? Like, we didn't take the game. And of course, Alan knows that he did take it by accident, but he's trying to hide the truth so he doesn't get in trouble. And they get appointed a goofy jester lawyer that is kind of a buffoon during their trial. And you have, of course, the other side is trying to get them in trouble, and they're trying to defend themselves, and it's going nowhere. They get an intermission, and the boys are pretty much taken back to a cell, and they're talking. And Alan kind of comes clean to Jimmy and says, hey, look, I did take the game by accident, and I got it. I wasn't thinking. I was more upset with the store owner, but trust me, I wasn't trying to take it, and I need you to take the blame for me. And Jimmy's taking it back. He's like, hey, why do you want me to take the blame for you? And Alan goes into a thing where he's like, I'm a 4.0 student. My parents are rich. I go to this really nice school. They're kind of hoping that I get a good ride to college. If you do this for me, I'll give you whatever I can in return. And Jimmy's like, I don't need your money. This is kind of messed up, but I'll do it for you because you went out of your way to stick up for me for that, from that store owner. And that meant a lot to me. And Alan's kind of like, okay, well, I get my way here. And we get an update on the trial later where Jimmy's taken back along with Alan to the courtroom. And Jimmy confesses, and Alan's pretty much set free to go. And Alan initially tries to leave and get out of Dodge and have his limo driver just peel out of there while Jimmy gets in trouble. But the limo driver approaches Alan with hockey tickets that plays into a thing they talked about early on in the episode. And this kind of reminds Alan that he's doing the wrong thing and that Jimmy's actually a genuine friend to him, and maybe he should be a genuine friend to Jimmy and not let him take the blame. But unbeknownst to Alan, from Jimmy's point of view, in the courtroom, he's getting his sentence, and the judge looks into the wisdom glass and essentially sends them to be executed via guillotine. And he's about to be beheaded when Alan comes in and tries to save the day. And in doing so, he confesses to the judge, and you think that something else is going to happen now since he came clean about it and confessed, but because it's Are You Afraid of the Dark, they're going to try to keep it dark as long as possible. But Alan is fortunately saved by his friend Jimmy, who takes the wisdom glass and pretty much holds it hostage to buy them time to escape. And they may or may not succeed in doing so, and something unfortunate might happen to the wisdom glass via some clumsy character that we see in the story. Well, when the kids reach the ending of the tale, they think that they're going to get out of the situation, but unlike other Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes, there's a twist implying something dark is about to happen to them yet again. And the story fades to black, and the Midnight Society wraps up the tale and goes on their merry way, and that's essentially what you're going to expect out of the tale of the wisdom glass in a nutshell. So, yeah, let's start off with some good things to say about this episode, because here's the thing. I think that in terms of design work, of like costumes and set pieces and even directing ability, this has to be one of the better made Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes. And I want to tip my hat to Jacques Leberg for his cinematography abilities in this. I don't know if this was his only episode he made. I'm assuming he probably made a little more than this. But the directing capability of this story was pretty well done for a low-budget show. And there's a lot of imagination put into this story that I think most people would be surprised at if they have never seen this before and they want to check it out. Man, I'm telling you, the throwback to the medieval times look of the Jester and like the Alice in Wonderland morbid vibe this tale has going for it, it really does work on like an imagery level, and it makes it kind of like an eye candy experience within this show. There's something bizarre about it that is weirdly entertaining and kind of frightening in that subtle way, but nothing too deep with that. And I have to say, the lady with no eyes has to be one of the visually scariest characters in Are You Afraid of the Dark? Hands down. So yeah, it is pretty effectful in the horror department, I would say, and in the atmosphere and the look of the episode. I think the characters, they have distinct arcs. When I'm so much Jimmy, he's the poor kid that has Alan stick up for him. He's kind of a doormat in the story, unfortunately, but Jimmy does have his own arc where he still has a hand in his own fate by the end, and I like that he wants to thank Alan for everything he did. And Alan you think that he's a good kid at heart early on, but then you start to see that he's more so motivated by selfish reasons, and it becomes unlikable. But then he has that character turn near the point of the climax where he realizes the error of his ways, and he has a distinct character arc and a newfound friendship within Jimmy. And I think the boys' relationship in this episode is kind of realistic. For people who just met, Alan and Jimmy don't owe each other anything. They're just experiencing this because they're kind of in on the interest of this video game. But Jimmy brings out a new perspective to Alan, who kind of lives in a bubble, which I think is good for a character like him. And then Jimmy also gets to kind of see Alan's point of view and understand kind of where he's coming from. So the way these two characters communicate, it feels authentic and kind of genuine and written from a place of heart. And while Are You Afraid of the Dark is not known for having like really riveting written stories or anything like that, most of the time it's super streamlined to fit a runtime and all of that, I have to give Mark Perry some credit here and say that he had a half decent idea, especially for this show standards. So yeah, the writing of these characters were pretty cool, and I enjoyed a good amount of it here. And one thing I think really stands out about Are You Afraid of the Dark is the fact that it never has twist endings. And this is one of the handful of Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes that actually have a twist, a la something like Goosebumps. And in a certain way, this kind of feels like something you would expect out of Are You Afraid of the Dark, but it more so feels like a weird Tales to Give You Goosebumps idea that you could have seen in that short story collection back in the day within any of the books. And I weirdly enjoy it for that. It has this Goosebumpsian vibe to it. Not quite Stein, but maybe a ghostwriter would come up with this idea, and Stein can maybe write the skeleton of it. I don't know, but there's something about it that just doesn't feel like your typical dark fare, even though it's similar to some other things you'll see in older seasons and all of that with the fantasy and stuff. This is pretty experimental in that regard, even for dark standards with fantasy and horror. It kind of like works in that synergy way, and it's, I don't know, the vibes of this feeling like Goosebumps kind of helps separate this episode from other episodes in the entire show, and I can appreciate that. And I will say there is a nice moral to the story about not stealing. That's pretty much driven tooth and nail with the plot of the story. But you see the error of the ways and how worrying about money or just material items can get you into these situations, and somebody out there is going to have to, deliver the punishment. Somebody's going to have to reap what they sow. While it's not executed in the best ways wholesale, I like the idea here. So yeah, it had some solid positives to the episode here, but there are some negatives. I'm going to throw this first one out here because a lot of people are probably going to notice this. The pace in the story itself is kind of weak. The story starts off within the mall, kind of fine. It's establishing characters early on, but then once you get past the point of, Alan going to Jimmy's house and you get to the competition area, there's this whole thing about a tournament mentioned on the flyer that you think is going to be an actual thing in the story, but it's not really that. A good amount of this episode, if not majority of this episode, is spent around this trial of sorts, where these two boys are put on persecution by these beings that are keepers of the knowledge and that kind of worship this thing called the wisdom glass. And I feel like it was a bit of a waste to spend too much time with that. That's an element they could have maybe spent 1 to 2 minutes on, and then they could have moved the boys into the tournament, but kind of recontextualized it to being like, if one of you better admit that you stole it, or if you don't want to admit it, or if you keep wanting to blame each other, then you're going to have to fight in these certain things. And maybe the boys can be put at odds because, one of them is obviously telling the truth and one of them's lying. There's a lot of potential there, but I guess the episode didn't have budget to do that, and it just spends a lot of monotonous time just sitting around doing nothing with lame gag humor from the Jester. And I'm sorry, the guy who plays the Jester in this episode, he played Ichabod Crane in The Tale of the Midnight Ride. He also played one of the teachers in The Tale of the Dead Man's Float. I was shocked to learn that. And what they did to him here, playing the lawyer Jester, they gave him some cringy lines, and his jokes are not funny. It is what it is. But yeah, the humor in this does not land. There's some badly delivered music in this episode. And I'm not saying that some Are You Afraid of the Dark's episode don't have this issue, but there's some oddball, quirky music that I don't feel quite works here. And it's just a little too camp for my liking, even for, kids' horror standards, especially television. It can be eye-rolling at times. And I do feel like there are some confusing ideas here in terms of the moral. I mentioned that was more of a positive, but here's the problem with the story. When the kids come to the tournament, they're pretty much told the reason why they're being put on persecution is that there's this emphasis on wisdom, and these beings or secret society keeping wisdom at bay says that you cannot buy or steal wisdom, you have to earn it. But if this is the truth, why is there a PC game from this secret society being sold to make you gain wisdom on the market? Why is that even a thing? There's no explanation why they've made this thing a PC game, why they branched out to this. There's no explanation, at least earnestly here, why them stealing it is an issue if they seek wisdom. It's never made to make sense, because I guess they were kind of going for the direction that the kids would be gravitated to the idea of the wisdom glass itself, which the episode is aptly named after, which is my last negative. The wisdom glass is basically a bona fide magic 8-ball that does random things because plot wishes, and they barely even use it to amplify stakes in the story other than one time, when apparently the judge reads the ball and it tells them that the ball wants the kid executed. It's very underutilized. You don't really get a sense of what these beings are. All you know is that they somehow have taken a hut out in the middle of a field and are luring people into this tournament. Why is this a thing? It's never explained. And it's such a... and the only reason I'm bringing this up is because it's such a pivotal part in the story, where the rest of the story is built upon that event, and you expect the setup there to have some legitimate payoff, but there's no actual payoff within the story, which feeds back to my first negative here. The story is very weak. It's very weak. It's not as strong as it needs to be. It's not as concrete. You have to put a lot of disbelief at the door sometimes, and even doing so, it's hard to look past these blatant things that are just kind of egregious. But with that out the way, with all those positives and negatives out that I've said, this kind of balances them out a little bit. I think that after all said and done, I found myself liking this. So if I like something, I'm willing to give it a C or higher. Now, I knew I was not going to give this episode an A because of those problems. I knew that it was going to be between a C or a B. And I decided against a B because, to me, a very good, especially for Are You Afraid of the Dark standards, you have to be really good in multiple departments or exceptional most of the time if you're going to have a weaker story. And while this tale does have some really good qualities, I think the biggest detractor for me is the story, or at least what happens in the plot. Not a lot happens here, and the story isn't that good comparative to other B-tier episodes I've given out. So this goes in the C-tier column. But with that being said, its strengths do kind of lend some potential here. Not saying that it lived up to all of its potential. Obviously, there's some used and wasted stuff here, but there's potential there at least. So I was willing to give this at least a fine. And it's a bona fide fine episode to me. It's kind of average, kind of light good. So I gave this thing like a 3.6 out of 5 stars and only deducted 1.4 points off for those issues I made. Those issues were kind of medium to slightly heavy hitting, but not too detrimental here. I came out quite liking this episode this time around. I liked it more than the last time. This is definitely one of those situations that by the time I finish the show, I can rewatch this thing and not like it again. But I'm kind of glad I picked to review it now, because I think I'm most fair with it than I have been in the past. I used to think it was just really boring and just a snooze fest, but there is some stuff to like here, and that's at least enough to hold me through it. And I think most people will get at least some mild enjoyment out of this episode, in the worst case anyway. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on the Tale of the Wisdom Glass. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen this episode before. Do you love this or do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.